What's going on, traders, and welcome back to another YouTube video. It's your boy here, the Forex Amateur. And surprise, we're going to be doing a weekly outlook, right? I know it's been a minute since I've done a weekly outlook video. And since I had some time on my hands today, I said, let me just have a sit down since I am doing my weekly charting anyway. Let me just have a sit down and go through a few charts really quickly. Perhaps it might not follow the format of the previous weekly outlook videos that I've done since it's been a minute. But let's see what I can sort of get into here on today's video. So as you know, before I get into these videos, I'd like to put out a little disclaimer. Remember, I'm not licensed nor qualified to offer financial, investment, or even trading advice, right? Everything I speak about on these videos is purely my own opinion. It's my own approach to the market. It's what I do with cash that I am willing to lose. So if you do, I do not advocate live trading with capital as it is very risky. But if you do it with cash that you are willing to risk or lose and ensure that you do your own research, right? So we're going to start off with, I believe that I should be sharing. Yeah. So we're going to start off with the dollar index, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about the dollar index. I'm not going to go too much into detail regarding specifics and so forth. But the purpose of this is to sort of give you a general area that you can sort of focus on, when you're doing your charting for your demo trading for the week. So now when we look at the dollar index, it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that the dollar index has been in a long-term downtrend. Now, if you go back to any of the weekly outlook videos that I have done in the past, you'll notice that we would have gone through the dollar index on there as well, right? Now, I have not necessarily gone back and checked up on any of that analysis or anything, but feel free to do so, right? And feel free to drop your feedback in the comments of the video and let us know how exactly it's played out. What discrepancies you do find, anything that we were in like what can I say? Anything that we were not precise about, and obviously make sure that you also put in there all the levels that did work out and all the zones that did work out. But getting back to it, let's talk about the dollar index on the weekly chart. We can see that very clearly. We've had this previous range. The market then broke to the downside, putting in this lower high from there, right? Then it formed this lower high, which failed to break structure to the downside. So that is number one, telling us that there's a depletion of this bearish momentum, and it's most likely going to lead to the market wanting to react and trade higher, right? Once we got this failure swing here, failing to break market structure, this means that from that point onwards, we were in a bullish market. How did we now confirm this? When we then had a break of this high, right? I assume that the break would have just happened a week ago. So when we had the break of this high, this has now confirmed that, okay, this market is short-term bullish right now. And I say short-term bullish regardless of what time frame we're currently on, because that is just my framework of how I look at the market, right? This is short-term bullish because it has not necessarily broken any significant structure. Though it has broken this high, this lower high is of no significance because it failed to break market structure, right? The last lower high that broke market structure was this one. So once we break this high, this is when I would now be okay, super confident to say that this market is now bullish and we should then expect a revisit of this high in here. But for now, we are short-term bullish on this market. On any pullbacks, we will look for pushes back into the upside, targeting here and obviously targeting above this high. I believe that should actually be around the same area. Let's just have a look at that. So this would obviously be the target, the overall target that I would be looking for. Why? Because I believe that there would be liquidity above this high, and this is a very significant liquidity pool for myself and my students that we do use when it comes to trading, right? So from around above this high, the moment price trades above this and starts to reject, I'll then be looking for trades to the downside. Now, looking at this for now, what I can have on here, ultimately I can be looking at, this is my high low, right? This is my high low in here, right? And I can then be looking at this current candle as my higher high, I would say. But because I don't like to do that, I like my high to form or my structure point to form prior to me marking it up. So for now, I would say that this market has not created a valid high yet. However, it has now broken short-term market structure. So I'll mark out that breaking market structure in there. And for me, this is still a counter trend, nothing about the trend yet, because of the fact that this is not a significant lower high. So when you see that breaking market structure in there, I'll then be looking for levels of significance for me to be looking to trade from. As I'm not going to get into the specifics, like I said, of the zones that I will be trading, we can simply mark up this area in here, right? So this was simply the last resistance, right? As you can see in here, what's essentially happened is the market has come up, rejected multiple times, gave us a push down, and now it's broken above, right? So what we can look for here is a simple break and retest of this level, looking to target above this high. Maybe you can target this imbalance that's in here, maybe target this area of resistance, whatever it is, right? But for now, looking at what I can see on this market, I'll most likely be expecting a pullback into around this area, and then look for this market to go higher, which means that for the next week or so, I should be looking for the market trading lower, right? So currently short-term bearish in this market, looking to see it come back into this area. And then from around here, we can look for it to then go higher, right? Just mark it all the way up into the high of this week, right? So we look for something into there, and then we're looking for this market to go higher. So let's just drop down to the daily chart, and let's have a look at what the daily chart is telling us. Now, when I look at weekly bias and so forth, this is essentially the chart that I do use, right? So now we know that this was a failed lower low, which means that this is a higher low, right, on the weekly. From that higher low, we trace back, we can see that this was the last structure point. It was broken at this point, which means that now we would expect to see a higher high. And as you can see at this point here, we then have that higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high, right? So currently in this range right now, we had our previous break of structure at that point. So that last break of structure swing will be the swing that I will be focusing in on, right? So we can see that that swing started from this higher low in here. It broke structure, and then it printed in this higher high in here, or we can say that that is the ultimate high in there, right? So when we look at this, we can see that, okay, this market has come up into that area and it's rejected. It's given a significant bearish engulfing candle at here. Even though the next candle's been rejecting, this is only telling us that perhaps this market wants to come back and revisit this area, go slightly higher or whatever it is, and then trade lower, right? But currently it's showing signs of a reversal or a retracement. What can we see in here? We can see that this market traded up, formed a high, rejected, came back up, rejected, pulled back, came back up again, broke above their high, and then it's given us a huge impulse to the downside. So when I look at this in here, this is significant because this could be some sort of a liquidity grab right now. But for that, I would have to drop down to a lower time frame. Currently looking at this, my last significant level in here would more or less be this area right here. So what can we see about this? This is that higher time, this is that break-in structure on the weekly chart, right? This is that break-in structure on the weekly chart. This is the break-in structure on the daily. It happened at this point in here. Is there anything of significance in here that I would want to look at? Let's say perhaps we can focus in on this being a resistance, right? So perhaps something in here. I would focus in on. Okay, so looking at this now, we will want to see this market trade down into this area, right? So I'll be looking at this market perhaps coming down into this area, give us a pullback into there. And then from there, we'll be looking to take this market lower, right? Because currently, this is the last area that the market showed any sign of bullish momentum, right? Once it breaks through this area, it's now showing a willingness to want to go lower. Let's be very specific, however, in understanding that we are in an overall bullish market, and all we're trying to do is, let me actually go back to this weekly, and I want to show that weekly zone, right? So all we're trying to do is this, take the trade down to the break and retest of this weekly resistance, right? Weekly, okay, it should be showing on that time frame as well. Okay, cool. So now when we go back to the daily, what do we notice? That our weekly break and retest support and resistance is above, is below the one that we're looking at here on the daily. Overall, we'll still expect the market to come back down into here, right? Perhaps what we could now see happening is we could see the market push here, push here, pull back, and then drop from there, whatever it is. But overall, looking at the market currently, the way it is set up at the moment, I would be looking to see it coming back down. We've also got this huge area here, um, in here as well, where we have unfilled orders that the market will most likely want to come back into. So overall, looking at the dollar index, I would be looking at a bearish market, right? The reason for that is because we've just put in the weekly high, or most likely putting in the weekly high. We've got this weekly resistance that's just been broken that we're expecting to see retested, right? And once that happens, we'll then try to look for something back to the upside from around that area. But for now, we're short-term bearish, or bearish on this market for the remainder of this week, or for this week. I'll just be looking for opportunities to the downside, even to come back below this low here as well. Might also be an option for the market to come back down below. Oh wow, that's in white. Sorry about that. Even for the market to come back down. What just happened? Okay. Sorry about daily. Yeah, even for the market to come back down below this low is completely an option, right? So my overall target for any sells, first target will be here, second target will be here, final target will be down in here. But if we get a reaction from this level here, then I'll be okay with closing off the position, right? Overall, looking at volatility, I'm saying volatility, I'm so used to synthetics. Looking at the dollar index, I'll be looking at a bearishness. So let's move over to another chart that I have not been looking at for a while, but it is a constant feature when it comes to pairs that I do like to trade, right? So let's talk about the euro dollar. All right, on the euro dollar, let's just start from the monthly chart. So on the weekly chart, we can clearly see what's happening in here. And let me just run it through real quick. So low, high, almost the same thing. It's basically a flip of what we're seeing on the dollar index, right? We've got that break of structure putting in that higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low, and a failure to break that structure to the upside, forming a what? A lower high, and that lower high has now broken structure to the downside. So overall on here, we're in a bearish market at the moment. We're in a bearish swing. So let's highlight what we can see in this market. So that would be the lower high, and that would be the breaking market structure to the downside. Is there any levels of significance in here? Absolutely. So this would be the last resistance that was last support that was broken to the downside at that area in there. And perhaps we'll be looking to see this market retest this area and then drop further from this area right now, right? What we can see about here as well is that the current weekly candle is going to be, sorry, last week's candle, I'm saying the current weekly, last week's candle, because this week's candle wouldn't have opened yet, seems to be the candle that was forming the weekly, the low, right? The low on here. So if this week's candle does open and maintain this as the low, then most likely we would be able to have this as now our lower low, and we'll be looking to see this market trade higher to either form a what? To either form a lower high here and go lower, right? Or to break above and continue higher. However, the fact that we've broken structure to the downside tells me that we might get one more bounce into there and trade lower, right? Because we're currently in a bearish market. Got a nice strong swing here to the downside as well. So we'll most likely be looking to see that happening. So if we look at this, we're currently in a expecting a bullish retracement on this market before it continues lower. But this is a weekly chart. So let's drop down to the daily and see what we've got on here. So on the daily chart, we can now see that weekly swing that broke structure right here, right? So we've got that high, any other structure created, and we've got that low. So that would be our daily swing break to the downside. So we can see that that's our lower high, and that's our lower low. So what do we have in here now? We know that that is more or less where we're looking for this market to come back into. We can see a bullish engulfing candle coming out of here already, right? So that's already showing us bullish evidence that this market wants to trade higher. So what we could do is we need to now drop down to a lower time frame, because what we can see here is we do have a break of structure here on the lower time frame. So what we can do is go down to a lower time frame, and we're simply looking to do what? To identify that lower high, lower low that was broken. And then when price pulls back, we want to identify if it respects this overall level here. So if it begins to reject, maybe gives you a double bottom, whatever it is that you look for as a bullish confirmation. And we want to see that sort of happening prior to us taking a trade and then putting a stop loss. And where would our target be? Excuse me. So our target would be at this area in here. So overall, looking at this, I would expect for the market to open and perhaps trade lower for the earlier part of the week, and then trade higher for the later part of the week, because the overall targets, the overall market should be going bullish for that retracement on the weekly chart, right? So moving on from that, let's go to, what's it not showing the chart here? So let's go over to the volatility market. And I know this is a bit longer than my standard weekly, since we have not spoken about the charts in a while. Hopefully this does also shed some light, in terms of what to expect in the market this week. Hopefully it's, it gives you an idea of where for you to look for your own analysis and so forth for your own applications. So as we see the chart loading up, or should I, yeah, let me just actually switch to the screen. And let's look at it on the MT5 platform. Trading view tends to freeze and does its own thing. Okay, so now we're going to talk about volatility. So we're on the synthetic indices, and I'm going to start with the one that everybody loves looking at, right? Because they believe there's no potential in any of the others. But anyway, looking at volatility 75, what do we see on volatility 75? So we can see that on volatility 75, we're in an overall bullish trend. How do we know that? We consolidated, we broke to the bullish side, we retested, and we broke again, right? We then retested. Oh, wow. We then retested this area here, and now we're going, right? So we can simply say that, okay, there was a break, and this was the retest of the resistance, and now we can expect this market to continue bullish. And I do not trade support and resistance, by the way, but I'm just using it as a means to be able to communicate the idea of what I'm speaking about. So what we can see now is, all right, so we have this higher low, higher high, and then the market traded lower from here, and it did sort of break below, right? So this is essentially a break of structure to the downside in here, right? So what we should expect is that even though we're in a bullish market, right? Even though we're in a bullish market, we need to understand that this short-term bearish swing means that whatever bearish levels there are inside of the swing will still be valid. Hence, the market will still come up and reject pretty strongly, right? If there's a level here, it'll come up and it'll reject pretty strongly. If there's a level here, it'll do the same. The reason for that is because we've had the short-term break of structure. Though it's in the overall bullish market, and though this was a quote unquote liquidity grab, right? Whoa. Though this was a quote unquote liquidity grab, it was a valid break in market structure, right? So just something I wanted to point out in there. So now when we look at here, and I'm going to be a bit more messy with this because now we're on MT5, right? And what we can identify is that is our weekly range, right? That's where that break of market structure came in below here. Wow, right? So that's where that break in market structure came in, and we can see this huge influx in terms of bullish momentum in this. So that's telling us, okay, volume has increased in the size of the candles, right? We're coming off a break and retest of a support and resistance. If you want to talk about this whole area in here, if you'd like to, I'm not really sure how people do draw theirs, right? So we can talk about this break and retest on this overall support and resistance, which we can even narrow down to this area here, actually, right? Yeah. So the break and retest of the support and resistance and so forth. So now we know that we're in an overall bullish market. Where is our targets? Our targets are here, here, and final target here. Right, I am expecting this market to make new highs, by the way, but that's our final target in there. Why? Because I target logical levels. There's nothing for me to target above here. There's no reason that I would be targeting above here unless something happens in the market that then expands my range for me to start looking out there, right? So for now, we know that we're in a bullish market. Nothing of significance in here right now. We could mark up this area of demand right here as well, right? So we could mark up this area of demand right here. And if we do, we can see that price has already reacted from it. Now, that's how people generally mark up their areas of demand, right? So it's that, I believe. For me, it's a bit more refined, but for most people, that's what it is. And you can see that we've already had a rejection of that area. So now we can drop down to the daily time frame with the knowledge that we have. So when we look at this area now, we can see what a breaking market structure forming a higher high coming off that support and resistance, right? So that's now our bullish range. What's happened thereafter? It's a nice strong impulse to the upside, and we can see this market then pull back into it. Into something of significance in this area here for whatever reason, right? Once that happened, we can see what a double bottom in here, and then this market has now broken structure to the upside. So overall, what would I be looking at on here? We can see that we've got a that didn't necessarily break structure, but we can look at that as our low, daily low, and that is our daily high. Now, this is a very strong impulse to the downside, but we're not going to let it discourage us because we know that overall we are in a bullish market. We cannot, however, ignore the fact that there is a presence of liquidity below these relative equal lows in this area, right? Presence of liquidity below these lows. So when we see that, we're not going to necessarily expect this market to trade lower because we are bullish, right? But if it does, we know that it's coming down into this area here, then we need to expand our search to something below here for us to go higher. But what we can see about this market right now is that this high formed this low, right? Hence, price came up into that high in that area in there, and it's rejected, and it's now trading to the downside, right? That all that's happening is this is a very similar what can I say? This is a very similar example of what I just spoke about on the weekly, right? Even though this was a move to perhaps come and say, quote unquote, grab liquidity below this level, it is a valid break in structure. Hence, when price hits levels of significant bearishness, it's still going to react from those levels, even though the overall trend is to the upside. It's important to understand that. So what can we see now? We've got that break of market structure to the upside. What we can now do is we can now find an area that we can then focus in on. And where's that area? There's our last broken resistance in this area here. So we can simply mark up our last broken resistance in this area. And that can be an area that we can look to focus in on when it comes to taking our trades, right? So what are we now looking for? We're now looking for this market to come down into this area, show us signs that it wants to reject, and then we're looking to take this market back into this high, back into this high in there, right? Remember, overall, we're in a bullish market, right? So this would be the first target, this would be the next target, and then we'll expand our range to the upside. Remember the targets that I've already spoken about on the weekly chart. Moving on from this chart, let's go to another chart. What's the other chart we can look at? Okay, let's talk about the volatility 10. Right. So, yeah, let's just use this chart. It's fine. This is a chart that I am currently trading at the moment. I'm building a mini account, a really tiny account. So I'm doing a little challenge for the end of the year. And this is a chart that I have to trade right now because of the size of the account, right? So looking at volatility 10, we can see that on the weekly, we have this range here. Why is that a range? Because we were in an overall downtrend, right? We can see structure levels here, structure points. We can see the first break of structure above there. We can see price traded back and then it broke structure, right? For me, this is one swing, right? Because I do not consider this to be a valid high nor that a valid low, right? So I'm looking at this as one swing to the upside. We've got this break and retest of resistance in there. What I'm looking at right now is I am looking at the weekly pulling back slightly before it continues its move to the downside. And the reason for that is because it's broken below this zone of accumulation that it was in previously, right? So I am looking to see a pull back into this area, and then I'm looking to see this market trade lower from that point. I'm not going to delve too much into what the zone is and so forth because it's not really part of today's conversation. Moving down to the daily chart, we can see that on the daily chart, we have not created any significant levels, right? But we can see that in the zone that I am watching, which is a demand zone, by the way, we can see that we've already had the first candle trade into that area, right? Reject, second candle, reject, third candle being an indecisive. So now we would expect to see an impulsive candle, right? We'll see an impulsive candle. And once we do see that, we'll expect this market to then continue to the upside from there. I have been bullish on this market for quite a while, waiting for it to react, right? It's just because it was a bit overextended on the bearish side, and there wasn't necessarily any significant levels in here that I would look to trade further to the downside, right? So I switched my bias to the upside quite some time ago. So looking at this now, we're waiting for that rejection in there. I can go down to the 1 hour chart as well so that you can see it is something I am trading, right? So our last break of structure came in there. We did have a pullback and another break in structure, right? Invalid low, invalid. So we can call that our last break in structure to the downside at that point in there. I'm not sure. I actually updated this. I'm not sure why it's changed back. All right. So we've now got an impulse. You can see we've already got an impulsive candle on the 1 hour chart in here, right? So this market is already showing signs of wanting to go higher. Overall, I'm still bullish on this market, and I am overall looking to expect to take it at least back into around this area here before we then see this market continue back to the downside. Moving on from there, let's talk about 10-1S as well, as it is something that I am also trading. So when we see on the weekly chart on 10-1S, it's important to understand bullish market. We've got this creating a higher high. I'm sorry, that's not a higher high, but it is a valid high. Created a higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high. From there, we've had this break of structure to the downside, lower low, lower high, lower low, right? What I am expecting right now is for this market to pop into around this area and give me a pullback into around this area in there. Overall, I'm short-term bullish on this and expecting it to sort of trade lower once it hits into around this area right now. For this week, however, I'll be looking at this level here to see if we can get a pop above this area. And once we do get that, then I'll expect to see some sort of retracements happening from about this area here. Reason for that is because there's a liquidity pool here that's very important to our group basically. And once price trades into that area, I'll expect to see some sort of a reaction, right? Other than that, however, this is a long-term bullish market, and I am expecting to see price reach back into around this area in here on the long-term basis. So looking at this on the weekly, we can sort of put a um, weekly high, weekly low in that area, right? And we're expecting this market to then trade higher. When we come on the daily, we know that what our weekly low is down here, right? So that would be the last high. Note that it's not a high that's broken structure to the downside, right? So it broke above here, pulled back into this area, broke above here. Now it's broken a high that broke structure to the downside, right? So now this is now way more important to me, telling me that this market is way more bullish, right? What I'm now looking for, right, is, as you can see, we've just had another break of structure. We've created this daily low, which means we need to create a higher high, and then we'll trade lower from that point. So for now, we're still expecting this market to continue trading higher. When we come down to the H1 chart, we can see that price is currently breaking structure currently to the upside in here, right? What has it also done? It's also traded below these lows in here, which we can quote unquote call a liquidity grab, right? I don't know why I keep drawing my G's like that. But anyway, so we can say that that is a liquidity grab, but we're still waiting to see this market show any more signs of what it wants to do next. Because for me on the H1 chart, it's already overextended. So I wouldn't be interested in trading anything to the buy side from around here unless I see something of clear significance. I see a pure run on liquidity, then I'd perhaps look for that, right? Because for now, I'm simply just waiting for this market to pop above this high. And then I'm expecting to see bearishness coming in from this market. If we look over here as well, we can see that there's also this imbalance in here as well that the market might want to retest before that pullback that I am expecting to see happen from here. It's not going to be a very deep pullback or anything like that because there's not much that the market has to trade down into at this point, right? So overall bearish on volatility 10-1S, and I am bullish on volatility 10, which is currently giving a very nice reaction at the moment. I was actually in on a trade here. And I currently closed it because I want to get something a bit lower. I don't want to trade up here. I want to trade something a little bit lower. So I'll let the initial impulse happen and then I'll get on it after. But anyway, so that's it for today's video. Hopefully it's had a lot of information. Hopefully, you guys are able to get something out of this. It has been a pleasure as always to share with you guys. And until next time, have a blessed and profitable trading week.